Introduction: The Loom of Gravity. The history of humanity is deeply infected by the pathetic cult of luck. Since the dawn of civilization, the inertial slave has been indoctrinated to believe that coincidences are fortuitous favors tossed by capricious gods or simple statistical accidents drifting in a chaotic and empty universe. He has been taught to kneel at the altar of chance, to cross his fingers and passively wait for a fortuitous combination of events to deliver the wealth, power, or freedom that he lacks the courage to forge upon the anvil of his own discipline. This absolute submission to the random is the perfect alibi of the weak. It is the thermodynamic comfort of those who, lacking the mass and density necessary to alter their environment, prefer to blame the blind geometry of the cosmos for their own insignificance. Whoever relies on luck confesses with shameful transparency that their will is as light as a dry leaf swept away by the hurricane of entropy. This text annihilates that optical and structural weakness. In the following pages, you will find no cheap mysticism or poetic solace. We will postulate with the relentless coldness of astrophysics and materials mechanics that chance is an optical illusion born of ignorance. Synchronicity is not magical happenstance. Synchronicity is the inescapable thermodynamic result of a body of extremely high density moving through the fabric of spacetime. What the terrified multitude calls luck is, purely and exclusively, the immense gravitational force of a mind that has acquired so much mass that it forces three-dimensional events to curve. It forces events to accelerate and collide directly in the exact center of its orbit. The universe is an infinite loom, but its threads are not woven with fragile cotton. They are made of heavy tungsten cables and forged steel that respond inexorably to the law of mass attraction. Ordinary men traverse this loom without altering the tension of a single cable because their vibratory frequency is weak, their core is cold, and their atmospheric pressure is zero. They are thermal ghosts, incapable of generating the friction necessary to intertwine events in their favor. However, when the monarch assumes dictatorial control of his internal temperature and raises the density of his certainty to the melting point of quantum lead, he transmutes into a supermassive center of gravity. Circumstances, elite allies, capital, and asymmetric opportunities feel the undeniable pull of this gravitational anomaly. To enter this treatise demands that you abandon the comfort of being a victim of chance. To understand the loom of gravity is to accept that every brutal coincidence that fractures your reality from this millisecond onward is the acoustic echo of your own density. You have ceased to be the die rolling on the table to become the force of gravity that dictates upon which face matter must collapse. Assume the geological weight of your will and prepare to rule the atomic lattice of coincidence. Chapter 1: Constructive Interference and the Clash of Waves. The architecture of three-dimensional reality, which the inertial slave perceives as a set of solid, immovable blocks separated by vast chasms of empty space, is in its deepest and most irrefutable essence an unceasing ocean of vibratory frequencies. Civilization has indoctrinated you to observe your existence through a deceptive lens. It has made you believe that you are an isolated object, a small sphere of flesh and blood that must physically collide with other spheres to produce a result. Under this paradigm of optical blindness, the event of being in the right place at the exact millisecond, finding the precise person or the perfect opportunity, is interpreted. It is seen as a statistical accident, a fortuitous clash of marbles on the immense billiard table of the cosmos. To this blind collision lacking design, the terrified mob has given the name luck. It is the comfort of the powerless, the thermodynamic justification for those who refuse to take responsibility for their own temperature. But when the architect of the now descends to the depths of pure acoustics and fluid dynamics, the illusion of luck disintegrates, revealing the terrifying, cold, and perfect mathematics of wave propagation. To understand the destructive and creative magnitude of a synchronicity, you must eradicate the image of particles from your mind. You must embrace the physics of fluids. Imagine the immensity of a dark ocean, a colossal body of water subject to unceasing barometric pressures and the gravitational forces of the moon. On the surface of this ocean, millions of waves travel simultaneously in all directions, created by gusts of wind or undersea eruptions. Wave physics dictates an unshakable law. When two of these waves cross their paths, they do not collide like two rocks, destroying each other or bouncing in opposite directions. Waves are pure energy in motion, and energy does not experience solid friction. Energy experiences interference. It is in the study of this interference where the source code of human mastery over chance resides. If a wave travels through the ocean and meets another wave, and both possess chaotic, misaligned, and asymmetrical frequencies, that is, the peak of one wave coincides exactly with the trough of the other, interference occurs. Opposite energies cancel each other out in the millisecond of their meeting. The water, which moments before rose with force, suddenly flattens. Kinetic energy is annihilated in a silence of entropy, and the ocean becomes once again a flat, dead, and boring surface. This is the exact portrait of the inertial slave's existence. The 200 Hz ordinary man walks through the economic and social matrix, constantly emitting longitudinal pressure waves through his thoughts and the contractions of his own heart. But because his chest is a cracked crucible, full of the dross of doubt and the terror of the future, the waves he emits are weak and erratic. The world around him is full of waves of opportunity. An investor seeking a project, a client needing a solution, a strategic alliance waiting in the shadows. These opportunities travel through the fabric of spacetime with their own wavelength. When the slave goes out to seek luck, his wave of desperation invariably clashes. It clashes against the wave of opportunity. Since they are out of phase, as the frequency of fear can never align with the frequency of capital or power, destructive interference occurs. The crests cancel out. Opportunity passes by his side without even brushing him. The door does not open, and the contract is not signed. Reality flattens before his eyes, leaving him in the plane of anonymity. And the slave, unable to audit the acoustics of his own failure, looks to the grey sky, curses the gods, and laments his bad luck, ignoring that he himself was the engineer who cancelled the miracle through the emission of his own dissonance. The architect of the now, the monarch who has assumed the tyranny of geometric perception, loathes destructive interference. He understands that his biological body is not a simple sack of meat, but a forged steel tuning fork, a massive acoustic instrument designed to impose his frequency upon the fluid of the universe. The architect knows that to forge a coincidence that alters the course of his lineage, he must manipulate physics until achieving the inverse phenomenon, constructive interference. Let us return to the dark ocean. In rare and terrifying occasions, driven by precise currents, two waves of identical frequency cross. When the crest of the first wave converges millimetrically with the crest of the second wave, there is no cancellation. There is no flattening. The cosmos, in strict obedience to the sum of the amplitudes, merges both energies into a single point of spacetime. The result is an oceanic aberration, a structural anomaly. Ancient sailors called it the wall of water, and modern oceanography calls it the rogue wave or monster wave. It is a mountain of liquid water that rises from nothing, doubling or tripling the height of the original waves, accumulating a gravitational mass and kinetic energy so brutal that no hull can resist it. It is born from apparent silence, rises with the force of a liquid skyscraper, and destroys any three-dimensional obstacle that has the audacity to float in its path. Synchronicity, that perfect coincidence, that fortuitous meeting in a hallway that ends in $1 million contract, is not an accident. It is your own personal and devastating rogue wave. It is the geological result of constructive interference between the high-pressure wave of your unmovable certainty and the wave of the resources of the external universe. To generate this mathematical collision, the architect must undergo a tuning. He must undergo a metallurgical tuning of indescribable cruelty. You cannot go out into the 3D world expecting your frequency to coincide by chance with the frequency of success. You have to isolate yourself in the anechoic chamber of your own mind, close the iron floodgates, and ignite the boilers of your furnace. There, in the darkness, you apply the fire of pure attention over the alloy of your thoughts. You expel the dross of hope, because hope is a trembling vibration that ruins the phase of the wave. You expel desperate desire, because desire emits the screech of scarcity. Only quantum lead must remain in your crucible. You subject the resonance box of your chest to this structural tension until the sternum seems to creak under the weight of your own conviction. Your breathing descends, becoming dense and slow. Your heartbeats synchronize, creating a toroidal electromagnetic field of such perfect coherence it resembles a laser. You have tuned the instrument. You are emitting from the core of your cells a longitudinal wave of low frequency and extremely high pressure, a vibration that travels through the asphalt of your city and the walls of corporations. You do not beg for an opportunity. You emit the exact mold in which it must fit. Then, with the glacial slowness of a supermassive star, the architect leaves his isolation and enters the fabric of the outside world. He walks through the hallways of his industry and attends meetings, but he does not do so with the haste of a hungry hunter. He moves wrapped in his own barometric pressure. As he advances, the fluid of reality responds. The universe, which is an infinite and docile resonance box, is crossed by innumerable waves of capital, talent, information, and power. When these waves detect the colossal emission from your chest, chance is forced to kneel before geometry. The wave of an investor seeking your level of audacity, or the wave of a change in legislation that favors your monopoly, aligns in phase with your own emission. The moment of the clash is of a subtle and invisible violence. Physically, it may seem a trivial instant, a spilled cup of coffee. It forces you to stop, miss your flight, and sit next to the corporate director you were trying to contact for months. An apparent detour in your route places you on the same marble tile as your future most lethal ally. The inertial slave would exclaim, "What an extraordinary stroke of luck!" He ignores, with the blindness of one who does not understand the architecture of the invisible, that the coincidence was forged by force, calculated thermodynamically, and welded to reality by the unceasing pressure of your own acoustic emission. In the instant of the crossing, your power multiplies exponentially. The rogue wave rises in the midst of the apparent calm of your routine. Constructive interference generates a kinetic energy injection so massive that bureaucratic walls are pulverized before your advance in seconds. Closed doors break from their steel hinges. Financial resources flow to your vaults. Synchronicity becomes an acoustic ram driven by the weight of galaxies. It is imperative that the Titan understands that this mechanics of wave clashing is not a sporadic event that happens once in the lives of the lucky. Synchronicity is a state of permanent residence for the master of character. If you maintain the tension of your steel cable without yielding a millimeter, if you refuse to lower the density of your certainty when the market tries to scare you with a crisis, your body becomes a continuous emitter of waves in perfect phase. Your life transforms into a continuous fabric of geometric miracles. You discover with glorious apathy that you do not have to break your bones pushing the heavy wheel of the economy. You simply have to walk with the correct tuning, and the three-dimensional universe will organize a choreography of constructive collisions to carpet your path with gold, power, and authority. However, maintaining this resonance demands an optical sacrifice few are willing to pay: voluntary blindness to the apparent lack of immediate results. Wave propagation in dense fluids suffers from inertial lag. When you strike the tuning fork of your chest, the wave must travel through the thick mud of the matrix. It may take days or weeks for your wave to find its geometric partner in the vast ocean of the cosmos. In this latency period, the slave despairs. He does not see the wave rise immediately, assumes physics has failed, lowers his shoulders, and changes his frequency. In doing so, he misaligns the phase. Destructive interference rules again, cancelling the wave that was already forming in the depths just before it broke on the surface. The slave aborts his own miracle for not having the atomic resistance to endure the weight. The architect of the now, forged in the titanium of patience, knows the truth. He knows that time is simply the friction of space measuring the slowness of dense matter. He does not withdraw his attention. He holds the heavy vibration of quantum lead with a stubbornness that defies sanity. He understands that while he maintains the emission, the math of interference is an unshakable law. He walks through the 3D world, not as an anxious seeker, but as the core of a hypermassive magnet, dragging the lines of force and forcing the events of chance to collide in his presence. You have ceased to be the drifting cork. You are the tectonic quake. Chance is the pseudonym matter uses when bent by a king. Chapter 2. Orbital Resonance and the Attraction of Celestial Bodies. There is a regrettable superstition that rules the social and commercial interactions of modern humanity, a belief so childish and pathetic that it has paralyzed the growth of entire empires before their foundations were even excavated. It is the doctrine of the chance encounter, the myth that great alliances are born of luck. The 200 Hz inertial slave has been taught that success depends on being in the right place at the right time, or possessing the skill to please crowds in the marketplace. This slave spends his life chasing human contact, handing out business cards into the void, and attending congregations of the mediocre, hoping for an accident. He moves through his industry like a wandering asteroid, an amorphous rock without a definite trajectory, blindly crashing into other debris in the darkness of space, wearing himself out in every useless collision and calling this exhaustion effort. This view of human relations is a blasphemy against the laws of astrophysics. For the architect of the now to reclaim sovereignty over the encounters that will dictate his destiny, he must forever abandon the sociology of the masses and adopt the relentless optics of celestial mechanics. The cosmos is not a billiard table where spheres collide by chance. It is a tapestry of exact gravitational tensions. If you wish to understand why certain people enter your life, why elite clients elude or seek you, and why synchronicity brings you correct allies with blood-chilling precision, you must study the great law of astronomy, orbital resonance. In the immensity of deep space, heavenly bodies do not move guided by haphazard chance. Consider gas giants and their moons, or massive planets orbiting a stellar core. Occasionally, the orbits of two or more celestial bodies synchronize such that their periods form a perfect mathematical ratio. Their gravities, instead of ignoring each other, intertwine rhythmically. They attract and adjust each other. This is orbital resonance. When two bodies enter this state, their trajectories become eternally stable. A massive body does not find its orbital companion by chance. It captures it because the wavelength of its gravity fits millimetrically with the mass of the other. They anchor in the void, and no minor disturbance can part them. The ordinary individual never experiences this level of resonance because his psychological and thermodynamic mass is insignificant. The slave is light, fragile, and his core is extinguished. Lacking a dense center of gravity, he cannot exert an attraction force upon anyone possessing true value. He attracts only other light bodies. He attracts clients who haggle over price, partners who flee at the first storm, and friends who only orbit while the weather is favorable. He complains that he is surrounded by mediocrity, ignoring that mediocrity is the only geological material his weak gravitational field is capable of retaining. Heavy matter ignores him. Heavy matter, the men and women forged in titanium, tungsten, and gold, traverse his solar system without flinching because the slave's gravity is insufficient to curve their massive trajectories. The synchronicity that introduces you to the giants of your industry is the result of a gravitational collapse. The architect of the now understands that going out to look for valuable people is a violation of physics. A sun does not go out to look for planets. The sun increases the thermonuclear pressure in its core, fuses hydrogen with terrifying violence, increases its mass, and lets spacetime do the work of gathering. To forge this attraction of celestial bodies, your first military directive is the densification of your own character until reaching the temperature of quantum lead. This is executed in the forge of absolute isolation. You must tear from your chest the biological mammalian need to please the crowd. The desire for validation is an expansive gas that decreases your density. It makes you voluminous but hollow. You must compress your matter. You lay the foundations of your empire in the dark. Reduce your words to the minimum, purge excuses, and adopt a work ethic so cold and heavy that your biology emits radiation. As you sustain this internal pressure, your gravitational field expands. The thermal radiation you emit stops being the tepid, scattered heat of the common man and becomes the background radiation of a neutron star. This is where the mechanics of synchronicity begin to spin their steel cables into the fabric of reality. The universe, detecting this massive gravitational anomaly in the 3D matrix, is forced to restructure the orbits of the elements around you to maintain the balance of the equation. Observe the metallurgy of this attraction. Asymmetric capital and market-dominating opportunities are not made of cork or balsa wood. They are forged in heavy metals. They are dense, demanding, high-temperature entities. Along their own orbits, these giants repel low-frequency masses because weakness is acoustically unbearable to them. But when your gravitational wave crosses the vacuum and hits them, the miracle of resonance occurs. They feel your weight. They perceive without a single syllable of persuasion that they have entered the event horizon of a monarch. The attraction is instantaneous, geometric, and brutal. The event manifests as a perfect coincidence. The contract that takes years for an ordinary man materializes in your hands in a matter of days. The competitor who planned to destroy you suddenly feels the barometric pressure of your authority and decides to offer an alliance. The universe folds the distance between massive bodies because physics dictates that great masses must gravitate together. Your density collapsed the distance between orbits. However, the non-negotiable corollary of possessing such devastating gravity is the thermodynamic purge of your environment. The slave cries when he loses old friends, or when certain clients walk away when he tries to raise his prices. He sees loss as a tragedy, failing to understand the mechanics of stellar radiation. When you raise your internal temperature and multiply your density, you become an incandescent forge. The light bodies, the individuals composed of ice and clay, who used to orbit around you when you were weak, cannot withstand your new heat. In astrophysics, massive young stars emit powerful stellar winds. They sweep away the gas and light dust of their system, pushing the dross to the darkest reaches of space, leaving only the rocky, dense planets capable of withstanding the hell of their proximity. Your structural evolution will do the same. Your new attitude will emit a solar wind that sweeps the mediocre away. They will leave you offended, accusing you of having become cold, distant, or arrogant. This purge is not collateral damage. It is a necessity of the strength of materials. You cannot sustain an empire of steel if your foundations are full of low-vibration debris. Rejoice for every inertial individual who evaporates. For each one who flees, frees space in the gravitational fabric so that a truly massive body, an ally forged in tungsten, can take their place and enter perfect orbital resonance with you. The assimilation of this sovereignty demands that you annihilate social nervousness. The architect never forces a relationship. Entering a boardroom or a negotiation with the anxiety of one who needs to be accepted is to invert the law of gravity. It is behaving like an erratic comet begging the sun to lend it some of its light. The king at his center takes his seat, expands his ribcage, and lets his mass speak. You know that if the counterpart possesses the proper intellectual and financial tonnage, resonance will be inevitable, gravity will do the dirty work. And if the counterpart is low density, if they fear your price, you assume with the apathy of a forensic doctor that the material did not pass the tensile test. You do not argue with cork for not being steel. You let it float into the drift of its own irrelevance and maintain your position unmovable, knowing the void it leaves will be mathematically filled by the next mass that your gravity is already dragging from the horizon. This is not a prize for moral virtue. The universe does not bring people together because they are good or have pure intentions. The cosmos is an engineer deaf and blind to morality. It only obeys density and atmospheric pressure. There are men of ruthless intent who attract empires of wealth and unshakable loyalty because they possess structural tension. They are immensely massive in their certainty, and matter, obedient as a terrified servant, runs to serve them. The inertial slave, despite being kind, noble, and charitable, spends his life in misery because his will is paper and his chest exerts no barometric pressure. Gravityless goodness is simply a gas cloud. Your supreme biological task is to stop trying to change the wind's direction and start increasing your specific weight. For the fabric of synchronicities to weave its steel cables around you, attracting the celestial bodies you need, you must install the icy arrogance of the stellar core in your nervous system. When doubt attempts to assault you, whispering that you are alone, You must remember the optics of attraction. Contacts are not sought, they are collapsed. Alliances are not negotiated from pleading, they are forced from resonance. Close the floodgates of anxiety and return to the forge. Study your discipline. Sharpen your intellect. Harden your physical body and crystallize the vision of your empire until it becomes a memory implanted in your basal ganglia. As you repeat this process, your electromagnetic signature will change. The unmovable pendulum of your center of gravity will begin to warp the fabric of reality. You will feel the resistance of the world decrease because the high-density bodies of your industry have begun to be captured by your gravity well. You will receive messages from masterminds who recognize your acoustics. Capital will flow to you because capital always seeks to rest in the deepest geological basins. You have ceased to be the tired pilgrim walking in search of a miracle. You have transmuted into the tectonic fault, the neutron star, the rare earth magnet. Let ordinary men keep praying to luck. You assume the immovability of the inevitable. Stay in your center, ignite the fire, and increase your mass. Increase it until light itself curves around you, and observe, with a smile devoid of all pity, how the entire firmament violently reorganizes to enter your orbit. Attraction was never a matter of chance. It was always, and will continue to be, the non-negotiable dictate of gravity. Chapter 3. The Optics of Opportune Refraction. The celestial vault does not pour meaning onto the earth, it pours radiation. The three-dimensional universe, in its cold and mathematical immensity, is an unceasing projector of events, circumstances, and phenomena that bombard the surface of human experience with the same indifference with which the sun bombards inert rock. Inertial civilization, trapped in its thermodynamic illiteracy, has developed the pathetic habit of classifying this radiation into moral categories. The 200 Hz slave calls events good if they require no effort, and bad if they threaten his comfort or destroy his lethargy. He believes the world is conspiring for or against him. He grants geological accidents and economic fluctuations a will of their own that they have never possessed. This is the most destructive optical illusion of the human species. Events, tragedies, financial crises, and rejections have no temperature, no morality, and no intention. They are, in the strictest terms, pure white light. They are beams of photons composed of a chaotic, superimposed, and undifferentiated mixture of all possible frequencies, traveling at the maximum speed allowed by the cosmos and crashing against the lens of your perception. To master the architecture of synchronicities, we must abandon victimhood and enter the laboratory of optics. White light, in its natural state, is blinding, diffuse, and lacking in surgical utility. It contains the entire visible electromagnetic spectrum, from low-frequency red to high-energy violet, but because all these waves travel together and superimposed, their potential is neutralized by the chaos of their own mixture. When this white light, in the form of an unexpected 3D event, hits the mind of the ordinary man, it encounters a disastrous medium. The slave is a piece of dirty, opaque glass, full of mineral impurities, air bubbles, and unresolved internal tensions. Observe the physics of this clash. When the event, a devastating layoff, the betrayal of a business partner, impacts the opaque lens of the slave, the light cannot pass through the crystal. The impurities of fear, resentment, and guilt absorb the photons. The light energy, finding no geometric escape route, transforms immediately into thermal agitation. The dirty glass heats up. The slave feels this heat as suffering, anxiety, and despair. His mind becomes a useless furnace radiating pain toward the environment. In the end, the little light that manages to pass through his surface comes out completely distorted, scattered in 1,000 erratic directions, casting monstrous shadows. The ordinary individual looks at the disaster around him, wipes the sweat from his brow, and declares himself a victim of a terrible misfortune. He ignores with the arrogance of the blind that the event itself was pure and harmless energy. It was the disgusting opacity of his own crystal that turned radiation into hell. The architect of the now operates under diametrically opposed laws. The solitary king does not beg the universe to stop sending white light. He does not ask for crises to stop, He does not seek refuge in the shadows of inaction, and he does not wait for the sun to send him a ray already tinted with his convenience. The architect knows that the secret of absolute sovereignty resides not in controlling the source of emission, but in perfecting the refractive index of the receiving medium. His mind is not cheap glass forged in the haste of fear. His consciousness is a triangular prism of purified silica, hand-carved with lethal geometry. It is cooled slowly in a vacuum to avoid structural tension and polished with diamond dust until reaching a transparency that borders on the inhuman. When the same ray of white light, the same crisis, the same rejection, crashes against the architect's prism, the most majestic phenomenon of physics occurs: opportune refraction. Snell's law dictates that when light passes from a less dense medium, like air, to an infinitely denser medium, like optical crystal, its propagation speed decreases drastically. This brutal deceleration forces the ray's trajectory to curve, to bend toward the normal. The architect receives the impact and slows down time. Thanks to the immense density of his quantum lead, the architect decelerates time in his own perception. While the slave reacts in a millisecond, screaming in panic at the disaster, the Titan does not react. The Titan absorbs the shockwave in absolute and glacial silence. He forces the event into the dense medium of his indifference, and by forcing the event to decelerate, he forces it to curve. It is in this geometric curvature where chaos reveals its source code. Because each wavelength within the white light ray travels at a slightly different speed inside the prism, the light decomposes. It disperses. The confused amalgam of disaster separates. It separates with surgical clarity into its entire electromagnetic spectrum. What a second ago was an indecipherable tragedy now unfolds before the architect's internal vision as a fan of isolated and perfectly outlined frequencies. There, inside the prism of his sociopathic analysis, the architect observes the colors of the event. He sees the red wave of structural danger, the flaw in the system that caused the problem. He sees the yellow wave of his competitors' reaction, who are running scared from the same impact. But above all, his hawk-like gaze nails the violet wave, the frequency of highest energy and shortest wavelength, the asymmetric opportunity. Every crisis, without geological or mathematical exception, contains within it the exact frequency of a colossal advantage that remained hidden by the blinding light of general panic. The loss of a huge client refracts and reveals that their exit has freed the logistical tonnage necessary to absorb 3 rival corporations. The catastrophic failure of a commercial launch disperses in the prism and reveals the exact map of a new market need that no one else is seeing because everyone else has their eyes closed by the glare of fear. The slave calls it luck when the man of power emerges from the ashes of a crisis wearing a heavier crown. The herd wonders how the architect always seems to land on his feet, how the worst accidents end up forging his best victories. They believe the gods have a preference for him. They cannot conceive, because their crystal is lacking, that opportunity was never a gift of chance. Opportunity was a laser ray the architect isolated. He isolated, separated, and projected it through the refraction of his own discipline. The white light contained the wealth, but it took the titanium prism to separate it from the visual dross. Forging this prism inside your own cranial vault is the most violent and painful task a human being can undertake. High-precision optical glassware admits not the slightest tolerance for error. If you harbor a single gram of victimhood in your alloy, if you allow yourself the luxury of self-pity when the atmospheric pressure of the world crushes you, you are introducing an air bubble into the molten glass. When the glass cools, that bubble will become a breaking point. The moment the universe sends a high-intensity light ray, an event of extreme stress, the lens of your mind will not refract the light. It will splinter into 1,000 pieces, destroying your psyche and leaving you blind in the middle of the battlefield. The forge of the lens requires you to voluntarily submit to the whetstones of isolation and objectivity. You have to uproot the language of complaint. Every time you formulate a sentence complaining about the difficulty of your industry or the injustice of the economy, you are throwing handfuls of dirty sand on your prism. You are scratching its polish and ruining its refractive capacity. The monarch's vocabulary must be sterile, descriptive, and lacking in thermodynamic emotion. Facing catastrophe, the king in his center does not say, "I have been destroyed." The king decrees, "The logistical structure has collapsed. Assets have shifted." By purging your language of mammalian hysteria, you keep the surface of the crystal immaculate, ready to receive the impact of photons without generating thermal resistance. This optical mastery grants you a power bordering on tactical immortality. When you stabilize your prism, the 3D matrix loses its capacity to threaten you. You understand with a cold laugh that reverberates in the walls of your vacuum chamber that the enemy cannot hurt you because their weapons are composed exclusively of light. If a competitor launches a smear campaign to annihilate your reputation, you do not raise shields to block the ray. Blocking is accepting friction. You simply remain motionless. Allow the destructive light beam to penetrate your prism, decrease its speed with your sovereign indifference, and refract that public attention to illuminate the launch of your new masterpiece. You have taken the caloric energy your opponent spent on hating you and converted it into a laser. Synchronicity is not a mysterious force that pushes you from outside. It is the inescapable consequence of walking through the world with a perfect crystal. Imagine a man walking through a desert of broken mirrors, where beams of light bounce in all directions, blinding and burning the multitude. If that man carries the prism of absolute certainty in his chest, every erratic ray that touches him will be ordered instantly. Events that for others are noise, interference, and tragedy, when passing through him align, focus, and draw a straight path of molten gold. Coincidences do not exist, only degrees of refraction. The external universe is an immense and chaotic market of disordered photons. Every day, people, capital, ideas, and accidents cross without meaning. When you complain that you have no luck, you are exhibiting the ignorance of the opaque crystal. Opportunities are raining on your head this precise millisecond. Fortune and elite alliances are constantly bombarding you with the intensity of a solar storm. The problem is that, because your mind is clouded by doubt and the terror of loss, the light bounces off your dirty surface and is lost in the void. You have to dare to assume the immovability of quartz crystal. Stop trying to run after opportunities. Opportunities, being composed of light, will always be faster than your carbon legs. You cannot catch a light ray by chasing it. You can only catch it by interposing a medium of greater density in its path. Plant yourself in the geographic center of your industry. Increase the density of your discipline. Polish the lens of your vision until envy, fear, and hope are completely eradicated from your nervous system. Then, simply open your eyes and await the impact. Let the chaos of the world economy hit you. Let the black swans of history crash against your chest. While the rest of the world covers its face terrified by the white blindness of panic, you will keep your gaze fixed, impassive, observing with the boredom of the gods how tragedy curves in the entrails of your prism, decomposing obediently into the 7 colors of the spectrum, delivering into your hands the ray of light. It delivers the light you need to set the horizon on fire and forge your empire on the ashes of chance. Synchronicity does not choose you. You refract it. Chapter 4. Spontaneous Crystallization and the Saturation Point. They adore the narrative of instant success because it exempts them from the thermodynamic responsibility of forging their own reality. If triumph is a random lightning bolt, then the slave is not to blame for living in misery. He simply hasn't had the luck to be hit by the storm. This narrative is a scientific aberration. It is a direct insult to the laws of crystallography and fluid physics. In the 3D universe, in the rawness of heavy matter, lightning bolts of fortune do not exist. Nothing possessing true mass is created in a millisecond from nothing. What the rabble perceives as a sudden miracle is the violent result of high-tension crystallization. To dismantle the illusion of sudden success and assume dictatorial control over time and matter, you must abandon cheap psychology and dive into the thermodynamics of solutions. In materials chemistry, there is a process by which a liquid is forced to contain an infinitely greater amount of solute than normal laws allow. If you take a container of water, subject it to the violence of fire until reaching the boiling point, and dissolve immense amounts of mineral salt, the liquid absorbs the matter. At high temperatures, the kinetic energy of molecules is so frenetic that the structure holds the dissolved material. But the miracle is in the cooling. If you remove the container from the fire and allow the liquid to cool extraordinarily slowly, isolating it from any external vibration, impurity, or gust of wind, the liquid descends to room temperature without returning the salt to its solid state. The result is a supersaturated solution. To the eye, it is just still water. But the solid-state physicist looks at that container and feels reverential terror at the atmospheric pressure contained. He knows that liquid is not at peace, it is in a state of terrifying structural tension. It is a thermodynamic time bomb. It is charged with massive potential energy that desperately craves a solid form. You, as the architect of the now, are that silica container. The invisible, dark, and exhausting work you perform in the silence of your own isolation is the process of dissolution under fire. For months, or perhaps years, you rise every dawn before the sun warms the earth. You study, you forge systems, you design products. You sacrifice the ephemeral pleasure of the masses and accumulate knowledge, discipline, and capital. You are throwing tons of solute into the water of your own consciousness. You increase the temperature of your will to the boiling point, absorbing the pain of rejection and the frustration of closed doors. But here lies the dividing line between the monarch and the inertial slave. The slave, if he ever gathers the energy to work hard for a week, cannot stand the tension of supersaturation. He demands that the universe deliver an immediate physical result. He needs someone to applaud him or to see his bank account grow. By demanding this immediate reward, the slave introduces a vibration of anxiety into his own container. He breaks the thermal insulation. He shakes the liquid with the friction of his emotional need. The result is that the system precipitates prematurely. The slave gets a tiny reward, a pathetic and marginal profit. A tiny crystal settles at the bottom of the glass, and the rest of the liquid returns to a state of boring, low-density equilibrium. He never manages to accumulate the critical mass necessary to alter the geography of his life, because he bleeds the pressure of his boilers prematurely. He cannot sustain the tension. The king in his center operates under an optical cruelty that defies ordinary biological understanding. The architect refuses to precipitate. He continues dissolving tons of effort and quantum lead within himself, and then he applies the icy cooling of tactical blindness. He observes how his bank account still shows nothing. He observes how investors do not yet knock on his door, and how the 3D world still seems to ignore his majesty, and he does not experience the slightest tremor of panic. He cools his nervous system. He adopts the static, bored, and monolithic posture of the vessel at rest. He knows the physics of the atomic lattice. Physically, to the eyes of civilization, the architect seems stuck. Relatives mutter that he is wasting his time. Competitors, who celebrate microscopic victories every day, mock his lack of visible results. The world looks at him as one looks at a glass of transparent water, ignoring the monstrous pressure within. But the Titan does not suffer from cognitive dissonance. He knows he is not failing. He knows he is supercooling the system. He knows he is bringing the fabric of quantum probabilities to a point of tension so extreme that 3D reality is about to suffer an irremediable structural fracture. He is ready for the seed. And then, on any given Tuesday, in a millisecond that possessed no pre-announced astrological glory, the collapse of synchronicity occurs. For a supersaturated solution to abandon its tension and become stone, it only requires the introduction of a nucleation seed, a microscopic crystal, or even a sound wave. In the fabric of your life, this seed is the triggering event. It is a tiny synchronicity. It is a casual encounter with a stranger in a hotel lobby. It is an email that arrives by mistake. It is the unexpected cancellation of a flight that forces you to sit in a waiting room next to the director of a corporation. The inertial slave will attribute the entirety of the success to the stranger or the wrong email. He will believe the seed is the owner of the miracle. What profound thermodynamic illiteracy! If you throw a grain of dust into ordinary water, nothing happens. The dust simply gets wet and sinks. The nucleation seed has no power in itself. Its power resides solely and exclusively in the atmospheric tension of the liquid into which it falls. Synchronicity does not save you, it simply offers the geometric coordinate for the immense mass you accumulated in silence to explode and adopt a physical form. Visualize the optical and thermodynamic violence of the saturation point when the seed touches the fluid. In chemistry, the process is not gradual. It does not take months. It occurs with the speed of fire spreading in an atmosphere of pure oxygen. From that small seed, billions of atoms rush upon each other. They fit with amazing mathematical precision. They build a crystalline network of titanium. Solid matter, hard, undeniable, and heavy, seems born from nothing, extending its needles and fractal geometries throughout the volume of the vessel in seconds, until the liquid becomes a monolithic block. This is the exact X-ray of the day your empire materializes. After years of silence and accumulated pressure, that trivial conversation acts as the seed, and suddenly, the crystalline network of economic reality collapses around you. The stranger turns out to be the investor. He hears the quantum lead in your voice. He hears the density of everything you have dissolved inside, and he does not think twice. He seals the pact. That pact attracts by sympathetic resonance 3 new elite clients. The influx of capital allows you to logistically destroy your direct competitor. Territories are ceded. Logistics are conquered. In the course of a few weeks, the entire topography of your industry has been irreversibly altered. You have forged a block of diamond where before there was only apparent emptiness. When the rabble observes this phenomenon, they will be petrified. News reports will speak of your meteoric rise. Mediocre analysts will attempt to dissect the secret of your success, studying the color of your tie or analyzing the exact phrase you said to the investor, completely ignoring that those variables are simple dust. You, from the frozen throne of your own vault, will hear their theories with sovereign boredom. You know the hotel meeting was not a divine miracle. It was the inevitable crystallization of the 3,000 days in which you refused to surrender your temperature to the ice of doubt. If it hadn't been that investor, it would have been a traffic accident the next morning that triggered the chain reaction. When the system is supersaturated to the point of suffocation, the universe is mathematically obliged to throw you a seed. The cosmos cannot stand a vacuum of tension indefinitely. Discharge is a requirement of the strength of materials. But there is a law of iron that the monarch must never forget in victory. In thermodynamics, spontaneous crystallization is a highly exothermic process. This means that when atoms abandon the high-energy liquid state to settle into a rigid structure, they release industrial amounts of heat to the environment. When the solution solidifies, the glass vessel literally boils with heat. In the architecture of your destiny, this means that the arrival of sudden success generates a monstrous amount of 3D heat. The press will seek you, sycophants will orbit you, and your own biology will feel the massive impact of dopamine flooding your neurons. This social and chemical heat can melt a fragile mind. Many aspirants manage to accumulate the pressure and achieve the crystallization of their first triumph, only to get drunk on the heat of victory. They allow euphoria to consume them. They lower their optical guard and begin giving their time to the vampires of attention who now flatter them. They melt away. By losing the glacial rigidity of their concentration, their newly formed crystal of success dissolves back into a muddy and mediocre liquid. The empire they built in a day crumbles in a year. The true king in his center does not allow the exothermic heat of victory to alter his internal temperature. When the $1 million contract is signed, the architect does not jump for joy. He receives the impact of success with the same majestic and glacial apathy with which he received scarcity during his years of isolation. He contemplates the newly crystallized empire and maintains his inner core at absolute zero. He understands success is simply the geometric adjustment of matter to the gravity he already possessed. To celebrate hysterically would be to confess that he did not expect it. It would be to admit that deep down he still considers himself a slave who got lucky. The monarch nods at the crystallization. He observes the purity of the atomic network he has forged with his silence. He closes his hands around the newly cooled gold, assumes responsibility for his new mass, and immediately begins to dissolve new solute in the boilers of his mind to prepare the ground for the next supersaturation. To master the saturation point, you have to make an irrevocable pact with invisibility. You have to fall in love with the absence of social friction. You must extirpate from your DNA the need for others to witness your process. While you are dissolving the iron of your discipline, the world will see nothing. The 3D system will treat you as useless because you are not throwing out results in their mediocre metrics. This blindness of the environment is not an obstacle. It is the thermal insulation of your own crucible. The ignorance of the masses is the perfect vacuum that prevents erratic vibrations from precipitating your mixture. Immerse yourself in the dark anonymity of the forge. Accumulate barometric pressure until the geometry of your own thoughts becomes so unbearably heavy that the illusion of linear time collapses under your weight. Do not look at the clock. Do not search for nucleation seeds in the street. Do not force the doors of the industry with the bare and fragile shoulders of linear effort. Become the ultimate solvent. Dissolve mountains of books and years of design into your bloodstream. Bring your spirit to a state of tension so pure that the universe begins to tremble, sensing the coming quake. And when pressure reaches the point of cosmic fracture, when not a single molecule of doubt remains in your structure and the density of your certainty is absolute, simply sit on your throne and wait for the vibration. A phone call, a stumble, a name whispered in the wind. And then the world will freeze. Observe with the impassivity of the stars how the entire universe aligns, fractures, and crystallizes violently, prostrating itself before you in the exact, non-negotiable, and indestructible form of the crown you yourself forged in the darkness. Chance is dead. Crystallization is your new language. Chapter 5. The Seismology of Chaos and Tectonic Faults. The blind worship of stability is the most lethal narcotic ever synthesized by human civilization. Since the first gatherings of frightened men around the fire, a pact of collective cowardice has been forged, dictating that inertial peace, the absence of sudden movement, and absolute stillness are the highest states to which an individual can aspire. The 200 Hz inertial slave consecrates his miserable existence to building a mud hut on what he perceives as firm ground. He studies markets, seeks secure employment, forges alliances based on lukewarm compromise, and buries his capital in vaults promising eternal lethargy. He walks with light steps, terrified of the slightest vibration. He prays daily for the soil beneath his feet to maintain its illusion of solidity. He ignores, with the suicidal arrogance of the blind, that firm ground does not exist. Three-dimensional geology, much like macroeconomics and power structures, is not a monolithic block. It is a thin, fragile, and splintered crust of rock. This crust drifts over a boiling ocean of magma in unceasing thermodynamic convection. For the architect of the now to assume absolute dominion over the architecture of chance, he must shatter his own desire for stability and embrace the devastating science of seismology. Synchronicities do not always manifest as white doves. Most of the time, when the universe needs to realign heavy matter to make way for your empire, synchronicity wears the face of the apocalypse. It is the catastrophic accident. It is the sudden bankruptcy of the corporation that fed you. It is the bloody betrayal of your closest partner. It is the collapse of laws. Faced with this destruction, the mob of slaves falls to their knees, weeping over the rubble of their mud huts, exclaiming that bad luck has swept away their future. The king in his center contemplates the same destruction and does not experience a single fraction of a degree of thermal alteration in his pulse. He knows that chaos is not blind, nor is it a mere accident. In rock mechanics and geophysics, what the rabble calls an earthquake is the release of energy accumulated through elastic rebound. For decades, two immense tectonic plates with millions of tons of mass push against each other. The friction between them is so colossal that they become locked. On the surface, everything seems peaceful, but in the darkness of the subsoil, the rock is deforming and bending under unbearable mechanical tension. Thermodynamic pressure increases millimeter by millimeter until the rock can no longer withstand the stress. It fractures, the plates slide violently, recovering their original shape and releasing a century of kinetic energy in a concentric shockwave that pulverizes everything in its path. That destruction is not the end of the world, it is the universe correcting a structural lie. Destructive synchronicity operates with this exactness. If your life or your business has been razed by a sudden crisis, you were not a victim of tragedy. You were liberated from a structure that had accumulated lethal tension and was built on a fault of lies and inefficiency. The ordinary man clings to dying structures. He maintains investments in obsolete industries out of sentiment. He tries to hold up the roof of a collapsing cave with his own shoulders. When the earthquake occurs, the slave weeps for the broken stones. The architect of the now, who has forged his intellect in the optics of objective cruelty, understands that the universe just did him the greatest favor of his existence. The seismic wave has demolished for free a building that would have cost him years to dismantle. The earthquake has swept away the dross, cleared the ground, and exposed the bedrock upon which the Titan can now cast the titanium foundations of his true empire. Mastery lies in the reading of these tectonic faults. The architect does not wait for the quake to surprise him. He becomes a seismologist of human behavior and capital flows. He studies his industry with the coldness of a surveyor, looking for subduction zones. He observes where arrogance has created a structural rigidity that will not withstand the next fluctuation. He finds the geological fault of his era. In an act of apparent suicidal madness to the slave, the architect does not flee the fault. He walks directly toward its epicenter, drives his steel anchor into the zone of maximum tension, and waits for the collapse. When the financial bubble detonates, the shock waves propagate. The P wave, the primary compression wave, hits first, alerting the weak. Then comes the S wave, the secondary shear wave, shaking the earth from side to side. The paper empires of your competitors, built without quantum lead, enter destructive resonance. Their crystals shatter, their capital evaporates, and they fall. The noise of the collapse is deafening, but at the exact epicenter, in the very eye of the chaos, stands the king in his center, wrapped in an aura of zero friction. How does the monarch survive the earthquake that annihilates civilization? Through the implacable application of anti-seismic engineering in his own neurology. In advanced civil engineering, skyscrapers that defy gravity in seismic zones are not built as rigid walls. They are designed with base isolation. The building rests on enormous cylinders of lead, rubber, and steel that absorb kinetic energy. When the ground shakes, the cylinders deform, but the superstructure remains static. Your mind must become that base isolation system. When destructive synchronicity hits, animal instinct will demand you cling to the walls and identify with the pain. If you do, you enter resonance with the shear wave and break. The architect applies the thermal vacuum. He disconnects his identity from results. He feels the economy tremble beneath his boots, but he maintains the spine of his certainty perpendicular to the abyss. He grants no energy to the catastrophe. He isolates his core. By offering no rigid resistance to the ground's movement, the energy passes beneath him without altering the architecture of his will. In this precise millisecond of general devastation, the forge of supreme chance occurs. The earthquake has destroyed the old roads. The logistical routes everyone used have vanished. The rules have been pulverized. Capital, influence, and power find themselves suddenly liberated and ownerless amidst the ruins. The inertial slave, stunned by the dust and bleeding from fear, is unable to see the gold scattered on the ground. He only sees rubble. The architect, who has kept his lens purified and his density intact, steps forward. He is now the only massive and coherent structure left standing for miles around. By pure law of thermodynamic gravity, all liberated capital and orphaned talent feel the pull of his gravitational well. Synchronicities reign upon the Titan thanks to the chaos. He finds assets of incalculable value sold at scrap prices. He acquires infrastructure simply by extending his hand. He is the only one who possesses the temperature necessary to forge metal in the middle of a nuclear winter. The 3D universe has used the tectonic fault to transfer wealth from the trembling hands of slaves to the armored vaults of the monarch. Destruction was the red carpet the geology rolled out for the true king. Understanding the seismology of chaos requires you to eradicate resentment toward obstacles. When you pull the heavy iron chain toward a future goal, the universe will send destructive synchronicities to purge your system of useless weight. If a massive contract falls through, the mediocre reaction is thermal despair. The man of quantum lead stops the crank, breathes the cold air of disappointment, and executes a calculation of material resistance. He understands the universe is informing him that the steel bridge he was about to cross had lethal microfractures. The loss was a tactical saving. If the contract had been signed, the empire would have collapsed years later, burying him alive. The cosmos has detonated the bridge today to force the architect onto an asymmetric path that will lead to a booty 10 times greater. The loss was a tactical amputation executed by thermodynamics to save the work. The synchronicity of the personal apocalypse is the rite of passage the universe demands from those who claim the crown. You cannot ask the loom of gravity to weave you a tungsten emperor's suit and then complain that the process requires melting the old cotton clothes you were wearing. Transmutation hurts. Assume the posture of the seismologist in the glass city of your existence. Stop praying for the stillness of tectonic plates, for in stillness there is no propulsion. Desire the chaos. Feed on the friction. When the markets turn blood red and the mob runs for the caves, you will ignite your voltaic arc light. You will drive your boots into the center of the tremor and say to the 3D abyss, destroy what you must. Pulverize the rotten wood and melt the weak iron. When the dust settles, I will still be here, denser and heavier, ready to take possession of the cleared arena. Seismic chaos is your most lethal ally. The earthquake is not the end of the world. It is the universe shaking the tablecloth to leave space for the exclusive banquet of the king. To truly master this, you must understand the magnitude of intent. In the Richter scale of consciousness, your willpower must reach a level that resets the geography. The slave operates at a magnitude 2.0. He causes tiny ripples that bother no one and change nothing. His life is a series of micro-tremors that never break the surface. The architect operates at magnitude 9.0. When he decides to shift his position, the entire economic landscape of his city must reorganize. This internal pressure is built through the accumulation of static silence. Every hour you spend in your anechoic chamber, refining your vision and refusing to speak of your plans, you are adding pressure to your tectonic plates. You are increasing the potential energy that will eventually erupt as luck. The world will see the eruption, but they will never see the centuries of internal friction that led to it. They will see the volcanic island appearing in the middle of the ocean and call it a miracle. You will stand on the cooling lava, knowing that you are the one who boiled the sea from the bottom. To maintain your base isolation during the quake, you must practice tactical nihilism. You must look at your current assets, your money, your house, your reputation, and realize they are all temporary structures made of glass. If the earthquake takes them, you do not cry because the architect remains. As long as the architect survives, he can build a skyscraper 10 times higher on the rubble of the old one. The slave loses his house and believes he has lost his soul. The monarch loses his city and simply takes it as an opportunity to redesign the streets. This lack of attachment is what makes you unshakable. Observe the competitive landscape. Your rivals are all building on the same soft sand, competing for the same lukewarm spots. They fear the earthquake because their foundations are shallow. You, by contrast, have dug deep. You have gone past the sand, past the clay, and anchored your spirit in the bedrock of the void. When the big one hits, and in this simulation, the big one always hits, your rivals will be busy trying to save their fragile glass windows. You will be busy capturing the energy of the shockwave to propel your next phase of expansion. You use the chaos as a high-octane fuel for your ambition. The synchronicity of disaster is the ultimate filter. It separates the businessman from the titans. A businessman needs a stable market to survive. A titan needs a catastrophic market to dominate. In the fire of a global meltdown, the titan is the only one who doesn't feel the heat because his internal furnace is hotter. Stop fearing the tremors in your life. The unexpected phone call that ends a partnership, the market crash that wipes out a portfolio, the sudden illness that halts a project. These are not bad luck. They are seismic tests. They are the universe checking if you have installed your base isolation properly. If you break, you go back to the forge. If you stand still, you move to the throne. The 3D matrix is a living, breathing organism that respects only those who cannot be shaken by its tantrums. By remaining static while everything else is in motion, you become the point of reference for the new era. The new world order is always born in the silence that follows the quake. While others are still looking for their bandages and their lost shoes, you are already laying the first titanium beam of the new structure. You are the owner of the ruins, and therefore, you are the architect of the future. The loom of gravity has finished its first major weave. You have seen how waves interfere, how orbits resonate, how light refracts, how solutions crystallize, and how faults fracture. You are no longer a passenger in the vehicle of chance. You are the engine of the inevitable. Your weight is now geological. Your silence is now acoustic armor. Your vision is now a refractive laser. There is nothing left to hope for, because hope is for those who do not understand the physics of their own presence. You do not hope for the gold. You command the gravity that pulls it. Take a deep breath and feel the magma of your own will circulating beneath your skin. The earth is trembling, but you are the reason why. The chaos is swirling, but you are the center of the storm. The ruins are everywhere, but you are the only one with the blueprints for the palace. Step onto the fault line with the confidence of an emperor. Let the ground shake. Let the mountains crumble. Hold your gaze on the horizon and watch as the universe, tired of resisting your immense mass, finally surrenders and delivers the crown. The seismology of your success is now complete. Chapter 6. Magnetic Alignment and the Forge of Chance. The most grotesque tragedy of contemporary civilization is the depressing spectacle of useless effort. If you observe the vast majority of the human species from the cold and distant lens of thermodynamics, you will witness a carnage of kinetic energy. The 200 Hz inertial slave wakes up every dawn convinced that abundance is elusive. He believes power and strategic allies are entities that must be caught through physical pursuit. He runs through the topography of his existence, spending monstrous amounts of ATP, sweating, pleading, pushing closed doors, and competing in an ocean of constant friction. To this hemorrhage of vital energy, the rabble gives the name hard work. However, despite all this structural wear and tear, the slave barely manages to accumulate crumbs. Wealth seems to repel him, opportunities slip through his fingers at the last millisecond, and people with true intellectual or financial tonnage ignore him with glacial indifference. The slave concludes that the universe is a place of scarcity. He assumes he has simply not been touched by the grace of luck. He ignores, with the absolute blindness of one who knows nothing of the fundamental laws of materials physics, that his failure is not due to a lack of movement, but to the most complete and pathetic anarchy of his own atomic structure. He is a broken instrument of inertia. For the architect of the now to claim an absolute monopoly over chance and force synchronicities to kneel before his throne, he must forever abandon the mechanics of collision and linear effort. He must enter the darkness of the blast furnaces, the silence of crystallography, and the study of the most tyrannical force, electromagnetism. The miracle of attracting improbable events, of forging coincidences that alter the destiny of a lineage without moving a single muscle, is not magic or witchcraft. It is pure and strict magnetization physics. Contemplate an ordinary block of iron extracted from the earth. Physically, it is a heavy, dense, and dark object. It possesses the intrinsic potential to exert a colossal attraction force. However, in its natural state, this piece of metal is completely inert. If you bring it close to a handful of iron filings or a coin, absolutely nothing happens. It does not attract, it does not repel, it does not alter geometry. It seems like a dead object. Solid-state physics reveals why. Iron is a ferromagnetic material, but in its raw state, it suffers from devastating internal chaos. Inside this block of iron, at a microscopic level, there are billions of tiny regions called Weiss domains. Each of these domains is, in itself, a small magnet with its own north and south pole. This polarity is dictated by the quantum spin of its electrons. But in ordinary iron, these millions of domains point in completely random directions. One domain pulls left, the neighbor pulls right, another up, and another down. They engage in a microscopic thermodynamic civil war. The sum of these conflicting fields is zero. The sum vectorial of all those conflicting magnetic fields is exactly zero. The block of iron has infinite potential, but its power is neutralized by its own internal division. This is the anatomical and optical X-ray of the ordinary man's mind. The inertial slave is a demagnetized block of iron, wondering why he cannot attract wealth. He does not realize that his own psychological vice domains are waging a war of mutual annihilation. One part of his consciousness desperately wants to found a financial empire, but another internal domain, terrified by risk, pulls with equal force toward the security of servitude. One domain yearns for sovereignty and solitude. Meanwhile, another domain, sick with mammalian need, begs for the approval and applause of the mediocre herd. The slave wants to be relentless, but at the same time has a paralyzing terror of offending the weak. This atomic dispersion of his will guarantees destructive interference. The forces cancel out inside his own cranial vault. To the outside, toward the 3D matrix, the slave emits a null magnetic field. He exerts no atmospheric pressure. He does not curve space. Therefore, capital, elite clients and opportunities pass him by without feeling the slightest gravitational pull, floating adrift like dust in the wind. He is invisible to the laws of attraction. The process of becoming the Titan, the geological anomaly that alters the trajectories of men and precious metals miles away, is the process of magnetic forging. In high-precision metallurgy, transforming an inert block of iron into a permanent magnet of extreme power requires calculated thermodynamic violence and isolation. Iron is not magnetized by politely asking its atoms to align. It is magnetized through fire and the dictatorial imposition of a superior field. The architect of the now understands that he must subject his own neurological and spiritual structure to the Curie temperature. In physics, this is the exact thermal point of transition. It is the point at which a material loses its intrinsic magnetic properties and its Weiss domains become completely plastic, fluid, and moldable due to immense thermal agitation. To reach this state in your own biology, you must apply the furnace of solitude and the suffocation of isolation. You must retreat from the masses. Close the doors of your smelting chamber and raise the pressure of your self-criticism until the old structural bonds of your identity melt. Everything you thought you were, your excuses, your childhood fears, your sterile compassion for those who do not wish to rise, must reach their melting point. You must become liquid. The slave's identity must become liquid and burning in the crucible of your chest. This is a process of geological terror because the mind abhors the loss of its original form. But it is exactly in this state of incandescent fluidity where the miracle of quantum architecture occurs, while the iron of your soul is white-hot. While the old Weiss domains have lost their anchorage, the architect applies from the exterior, from the vaulted chamber of his frontal lobe, an immense magnetic field of alignment. This external magnetic field is the quantum lead of your non-negotiable vision. It is the imposition of a single North Pole upon your being. It is the glacial, sociopathic, and absolute decree of what your empire is going to be, devoid of any contingency plan, lacking the slightest doubt, and free from all slave morality. You apply tactical blindness. You refuse to see any other mathematical possibility in the cosmos than the materialization of your dominion. This certainty is not a simple visualization or an ephemeral desire. It is a mechanical torsion force applied directly upon the atomic lattice of your thoughts. Under the suffocating pressure of this single directive, the billions of atomic domains in your psyche, which once pointed in chaotic directions, have no choice but to obey. Like soldiers terrified in the presence of a relentless emperor, every electron of your will turns on its axis and aligns in perfect geometry with the direction of the imposed field. Doubt submits. Fear submits. Laziness and the desire for validation are crushed and reoriented. All internal vectors now point toward the crown. And then, without withdrawing the force field of your vision, you execute a drastic cooling. The tempering. You submerge yourself back into the ice of the 3D world, maintaining the unalterable posture of your shoulders and the dense breathing of authority. Upon cooling abruptly, The atomic domains of your soul lock in place. The crystalline structure is sealed, but now, instead of chaos, there is a chilling military order. Every single atom of your being points in exactly the same direction. There is no more internal civil war. The vector sum of your forces is no longer zero. It has multiplied by billions, becoming a cosmic arrow of density. This arrow pierces the matrix of spacetime. You have transmutated literally into a high-power industrial electromagnet coated in titanium and operating in a state of magnetic superconductivity. From this millisecond of absolute alignment, the forge of chance leaves the realm of mysticism to become pure fluid mechanics. When the aligned architect leaves his chamber and walks through the geography of the corporate market or the hallways of his industry, he no longer walks as an inert object that must collide with others to generate friction. He walks radiating an invisible magnetic field that extends miles ahead of his physical presence. The external universe is an immense container full of iron filings scattered at random. These filings are the people, the resources, the credit lines, the government permits, and the asymmetric opportunities you need to build your empire. For the demagnetized man, these filings seem static or moving without sense. For him, they are impossible to collect unless he goes, one by one, picking them up with hands bloodied by linear wear. But when the Titan, magnetized by the weight of his own tactical blindness, enters the same room or the same market, classical physics collapses. The filings, sensing the violent intrusion, cannot resist. Matter possesses an intrinsic docility in the face of unified geometric force. Suddenly, brilliant talent hidden in a mediocre company feels the gravitational pull of your vision and approaches you, offering absolute loyalty. The airtight investor perceives your magnetic signature, a signature that breathes pure inevitability. His own money is dragged, almost against his rational will, toward the vaults of your projects. Bureaucracy, which for the weak is a concrete wall, organizes and aligns itself into perfect lines of force, opening fluid corridors for your will to advance without aerodynamic resistance. The matrix yields to the magnet. The mob will observe this and give it the pathetic name of magical synchronicity. They will say you were lucky that the investor was in a good mood, that it was a coincidence that the right talent crossed your path, or that the stars aligned. They do not understand that stars do not align themselves. They are dragged. Stars are dragged into position by the deformation of the fabric caused by a mass of your magnitude. What the rabble sees as a series of happy accidents is nothing more than the iron trail obeying the lines of force of the colossal magnet you have become. You did not forge chance by moving pieces with your hands. You forged chance by becoming the magnet that forced the pieces to slide across the board toward your center, overcoming the friction of the cloth. This mechanics of action at a distance completely destroys the dogma of strenuous physical work as the only way to power. Muscular effort denotes desperation. Real magnetism operates in the most sepulchral, heavy, and boring silence of the cosmos. An electromagnet lifting 10 tons of scrap steel does not emit noises of effort, does not sweat, and does not complain. It simply maintains the constant flow of electric current, and the immense mountain of iron obeys the physics. In the same way, the monarch seals his greatest victories by operating from immobility. He stabilizes the voltage of his certainty in quantum lead. He keeps the muscles of his face relaxed and his breathing submerged in the slowness of tectonic plates. Without a word of pleading, he watches the improbable reorganize. He watches as circumstances cross the abyss of economic chaos and adhere magnetically to the armor of his goals. However, carrying this level of atomic ordering in a world of entropic hysteria carries a constant danger of demagnetization. In solid-state physics, a permanent magnet can lose its power under heat. Extreme heat, the application of an opposing magnetic field, or violent mechanical impact are lethal. In the architecture of your sovereignty, extreme heat is excessive exposure to the crowd. The 200 Hz slave radiates constant thermal agitation born from his financial panic, his dramas, and his herd moralities. If you, the aligned monarch, allow your field to submerge in the hot springs of cheap empathy, if you stop to feel pity for the structural poverty of those who refuse the forge, their heat will penetrate your isolation. It will agitate your vice domains. It will make your atoms vibrate again in the chaos of doubt. If you allow this, you will lose your magnetic tension. Your empire will stop attracting gold and begin to crumble, not because the economy has worsened, but because your magnet has been heated by the dross of others' weaknesses. You must stay cold to stay magnetic. Empathy is a thermodynamic leak of power. The application of an opposing magnetic field is allowing the opinion of orthodoxy or frightened authorities to install their frequencies in your brain. When a supposed expert or a scared relative tells you your ambition is impossible, they are trying to apply an exterior magnetic flux to invert your poles. If you pay them attention, the atoms of your will turn to align with their mediocrity. The Titan applies the absolute diamagnetic shield. He bounces the opinion of the outside without processing it, knowing the word of a demagnetized man lacks density and geological weight. Their fields are too weak to touch yours. Finally, violent mechanical impact is the hysterical reaction to temporary failure. If a project falls, and you react by hitting the table and allowing primitive rage to kidnap your frontal lobe, the physical impact of that tantrum shakes the crystalline structure of your psyche. The atoms become disordered by your lack of poise. The architect receives the impact of 3D adversity not as a hammer blow, but as an object absorbed by an acoustic material. He dampens the loss inside his anechoic chamber, maintains the glacial composure of a basalt statue, and refuses to let the external world cause a quake in his internal ordering. The forge of chance is the eradication of the concept of randomness through the monopoly of order. The universe is not a lottery, it is an ocean of iron filings waiting for the directive of a hypermassive magnet. You have lived believing you were inert iron, pitying the currents of society. That hallucination ends here. Return to the blast furnaces of solitude. Apply the Curie temperature upon the dross of your old identity. Cast off the sterile morality that demands you be humble. Impose upon the liquid chaos of your will the electromagnetic field of absolute certainty. Cool the mold in the silence of your own tactical cruelty. When you walk through the dust of civilization again, you will not have to pursue fortune. You will walk, and the metallic sound of capital, alliances, and opportunities dragging across the floor to adhere violently to the sole of your boots will be the only music for the anthem of your sovereignty. Coincidences are magnetized. Chapter 7. Cosmic Tensegrity and the Tungsten Threads. The idolatry of dead weight and inertial masonry is the original sin of human architecture, a conceptual aberration that has condemned thousands of generations to live crawling through the mud of fatigue. Since the first slave piled one stone upon another to erect a primitive wall, civilization has been indoctrinated in the false religion. The 200 Hertz ordinary man believes that to build an empire, he must submit to the law of crushing. He assumes greatness is the result of placing heavy blocks atop one another, using the exhaustion of his nervous system as cheap mortar. In his linear mind, success is a granite pyramid, massive, clumsy, and requiring thousands of men. This worldview engenders the philosophy of continuous effort and the worship of wear by friction. The slave pushes the stone offers resistance, and in that head-on collision, the slave loses his kinetic energy, oxidizes, and dies crushed by the weight of the monument he tried to build. The architect feels only boredom. The architect of the now knows that stacking dense matter is the most primitive way to interact with the 3D universe. When the earth shakes, pyramids of stone crack and crumble because their only unifying force is gravity pushing them down. They lack geometric flexibility, they are rigid, arrogant, and structurally stupid. To reclaim sovereignty and erect an empire that escapes entropy, the Titan must abandon the masonry of wear and enter the most hermetic confines of advanced civil engineering, the domain of cosmic tensegrity. In structural mechanics, tensegrity, a portmanteau of tensional integrity, is an architectural principle that defies intuition. A tensegrity structure does not stand by stacking components. In its purest design, the rigid components that withstand compression forces never touch each other. They are isolated steel pillars seemingly floating in the air. What keeps these pillars in absolute stability is an implacable network of cables under tension. The structure does not rest on the earth. It holds itself in the air through a perfect thermodynamic balance between elements pushing outward and the network pulling inward. The result is a magical aberration, a tower that appears to levitate, using a tiny fraction of the mass of a traditional building, yet possessing superior load capacity. Extrapolating this to your destiny is the supreme mandate to master synchronicities. Synchronicities, those mathematical coincidences the crowd calls luck, are not random events hitting your head. They are not gifts from Providence. They are, strictly and ballistically, the tension cables the universe weaves to hold your empire. When the inertial slave builds his business, he operates by compression. He takes a pillar of effort, an ad campaign, a sales meeting, and brutally crashes it against the market, trying to force it to fit. He lowers prices to make the masonry fit. He creates excess thermal friction and exhausts his boilers. The universe hates being pushed. Upon sensing the slave's forced compression, the cosmos responds with Newton's third law, repelling the effort with equal force. The slave's castle becomes unbearably heavy, and the slightest breeze of crisis collapses the blocks, because there was never a network to hold them, only the tyranny of the push. The king builds differently. The king in his center builds through cosmic tensegrity. The architect does not force the pieces to touch. He establishes his compression pillars with icy precision. One pillar is his asymmetric product. Another is the capital accumulated without cheap exhibitionism. Another is the legal infrastructure of his monopoly. These pillars are separated in space and time. They do not interact immediately. To competitors, the architect's empire looks like a collection of disconnected elements, a meaningless plan floating in a vacuum. The mediocre laugh, wondering how the titan intends to hold it all up without sweating in the trenches or networking. What idiots cannot perceive is the crushing, microscopic force of tension the monarch applies to the 3D matrix. This tension is not a physical cable. It is the electromagnetic frequency of his non-negotiable will. It is quantum lead. The architect anchors himself in the vacuum of his certainty and refuses to doubt. By sustaining this structural tension uninterrupted, he forces the physics of the cosmos to respond. The 3D universe does not tolerate the imbalance of magnetic forces. When the vacuum of space feels the pressure of your certainty pulling from multiple angles, the fabric of space-time begins to spin the cables of integrity. And here is where the miracles of calculated chance occur. The investor you didn't know receives an email sent by mistake containing exactly the analysis of your industry. That is a tension cable connecting your product pillar with the capital pillar. A law changes suddenly, leaving a void only your infrastructure can fill. To understand the destructive resistance of these synchronicities, we must examine the material. The cosmos does not use silk. Physics demands tension that supports the fire of stars. The universe weaves with tungsten threads. In the periodic table, tungsten, wolfram, is an anomaly of density and resistance. It possesses the highest melting point of all metals, exceeding 3,400 degrees Celsius. Its crystalline lattice gives it a tensile strength so brutal it is used in rocket nozzles and military armor penetration. Tungsten does not melt in hell, and it does not break under mechanical torture. This is your network. When you maintain electromagnetic tension without blinking, the synchronicities forged for you are not fragile coincidences. They are cosmic tungsten threads. They are commercial alliances that withstand betrayal. They are market opportunities that do not expire with inflation. They are loyalties that tighten when cut. While the slave builds networks of contacts based on superficial empathy, networks of cheap plastic that melt when capital is scarce, you surround yourself with an unbreakable architecture of synchronized events that hold each other with the mathematical rigidity of a suspension bridge over the abyss of mediocrity. Observe the optical miracle of the finished work. Due to the nature of tensegrity, where the rigid elements do not need to rub against each other, the thermodynamic efficiency of your existence reaches extraterrestrial levels. An empire held by tungsten and perfect synchronicities lacks the weight of traditional bureaucracy. It lacks the wear and tear of micromanagement. It lacks the need to push employees or force cash flow. The immense tension of the network does all the support work. You simply watch the structure float. If you try to push a pillar with your own hands out of a panic attack, you would collapse the entire dome. This confidence has nothing to do with the faith of the religious or the hope of the mob. The slave's faith is a plea in the dark. The Titan's confidence in the fabric of synchronicities is the calculating boredom of the civil engineer who has checked the math and knows the tensile strength exceeds the load. The most violent challenge to this cosmic architecture is the seismology of the environment. The 3D world is an ecosystem of constant tremors, financial recessions, tariff wars, market collapses. When the shock wave of an economic quake hits, structural carnage occurs. Masonry pyramids of competitors cannot deform. They are rigid, and in seismic physics, what does not bend explodes. Shear waves pierce the stone of the competition, fracturing their business models and pulverizing their supply chains, leaving them in corporative ruins. But when that same lethal wave hits your Tensegrity empire, physics mocks the destruction. Your structure does not rigidly oppose the shock. The kinetic energy enters the system, but instead of breaking pillars, the force is instantly redistributed through the entire network of tension cables. The dome of your empire vibrates. It deforms elastically for milliseconds, absorbing the impact as a giant shock absorber. The crisis has not destroyed you. It has validated the asymmetric superiority of your tension. While ordinary businessmen run through the streets covered in ash, trying to save pieces of their stone walls, you remain seated on your throne, intact. The chances that wove your rise prove their tungsten quality. At that instant of others' devastation, you understand the purpose of cosmic tensegrity. The network was not just designed to hold your weight, it was designed to serve as a gigantic gravitational trap in the vacuum. Being the only structure standing, the capital of cowards and adrift talent are caught by your gravity. They flow into your vaults by pure thermodynamic capillarity. Your empire expands, absorbing the mass of the fallen market, without you having to fight among the rubble. Tensegrity has turned the crisis into your primary wealth collection operator. Forging this level of dominance demands you kill micromanagement. The slave feels productive only when pushing things with his hands, when exhausted and sweaty. He distrusts ease. If a contract closes quickly through a strange coincidence, the slave distrusts it, believing the necessary suffering is missing. You must uproot that bastard ethic from your central nervous system. The universe is offering you the path of superconductivity. If synchronicity presents the empire on a silver platter, do not look for a hammer to break the plate. Accept the lack of friction with the same coldness as a hawk accepting thermal currents that lift it thousands of meters without flapping a wing. Learn to install your pillars and step back. Make high-density strategic decisions and then submerge into the vacuum of non-intervention. Apply the absolute voltage of your certainty, but forbid yourself from dictating the logistical route to the cosmos. If you try to force a specific thread, you cut the tension. You rob fluid physics of its ability to find the path of least resistance. Limit yourself to maintaining tactical blindness toward the irrelevant and sustaining the atmospheric pressure of quantum lead in your chest. Feel the geometric weight of victory already won. Ignore the noise of falling masonry around you. Let the loom of gravity, with its invisible spindles and icy math, spin silently in the background of spacetime, weaving the glistening tungsten cables that will join your isolated actions into an indestructible fortress. And when you finally look up at the majesty of your work, suspended in the air, do not thank luck. Recognize the work of your own invisible hands. Smile with the bored cruelty of the geologist who foresaw the movement of tectonic plates, and take your place at the vertex of the structure, held by the immensity of the vacuum you dared to rule. The forge is complete. The tension is eternal. Chapter 8: The Doppler Effect of Abundance. Humanity's acoustic ignorance is one of the most silent and destructive tragedies of civilization. The ordinary man, deafened by the incessant noise of his own complaints and the friction of his desperation, inhabits the three-dimensional universe like a deaf person walking blindly along a railroad track. He has convinced himself through fables of inertia and laziness that when success, extreme wealth, or absolute power decide to manifest, they do so through an instantaneous and magical appearance. He expects gold to fall from the sky in a millisecond of silence without prior notice, materializing by the grace of a capricious providence. This childish conception violates the most elementary principles of wave propagation and the conservation of linear momentum. In the physical universe, ruled by the tyranny of mass and gravity, nothing possessing a truly colossal tonnage teleports. Dense matter must travel through the fabric of spacetime to reach your coordinate. In wave physics, no massive object moves through a fluid medium without announcing its arrival with unmistakable acoustic violence. This announcement of high barometric pressure is what the architect of the now calls the Doppler effect of abundance. To master the reading of synchronicities, you must dive into geometric acoustics. The Doppler effect is the apparent change in the frequency of a wave produced by the relative motion of the source regarding its observer. If you stand motionless by steel tracks and listen to the siren of a massive locomotive approaching at high speed, the sound perceived by your eardrums is not the real frequency emitted by the machine. As the locomotive devours the distance, it mechanically pushes and compresses the sound waves traveling through the air in front of it. This compression forces the wave crests to bunch up, decreasing the wavelength and skyrocketing the frequency. The acoustic result is a sharp, piercing whistle full of atmospheric tension. It is the undeniable sound of imminent collision. Conversely, when the mass moves away from you, the waves stretch, the frequency drops, and the sound becomes a deep, muffled and dying moan, the thermodynamic echo of that which you have lost. When you launched the titanium anchor toward the horizon, you altered the cosmos. You forced the fortress of your consummated empire to detach from the mist of possibilities and begin its inexorable advance toward your present. That empire, asymmetric capital, industry domination, unshakable elite loyalties, possesses a gigantic mass. Moving toward you, it operates exactly like the steel locomotive. It begins to push and compress the fluid medium of reality found right in front of its prow. This immense compression of three-dimensional reality generates shock waves prior to impact. These high-frequency compressed waves are the small daily synchronicities that suddenly begin to bombard your existence. Finding an old document with the exact key to your next corporate maneuver, hearing an airtight investor's name pronounced by a stranger at a nearby table, or the sudden cancellation of a trivial meeting that leaves you space for a life-changing call. The ordinary individual receives these anomalies and labels them as strokes of luck. He picks up the copper coin that chants through on the ground, satisfied, and does not realize the coin was simply the vibration of the railroad track announcing that the train loaded with tons of solid gold is just a few miles from crashing into his chest. The architect of the now never confuses the whistle with the train. He understands with the coldness of a physicist calculating trajectories that small and amazing coincidences are not the final objective of his forge. They are simply the Doppler effect of abundance. They are the geometric confirmation that his traction technique is working and that his victory approaches at destructive speed. Separating emperors from beggars occurs in the management of this acoustic compression period. The ordinary man's biological reaction to precursor synchronicity is his own condemnation. When a weak individual perceives favorable coincidences, his mammalian brain, addicted to cheap validation, secretes torrents of dopamine. He gets excited. Emotion is, in strict thermodynamic terms, a hemorrhage of heat and a catastrophic loss of density. The individual becomes agitated, runs to tell his friends about his wonderful luck, alters his breathing rhythm, abandons tactical blindness, and relaxes his muscles. He gets drunk on the siren's sound. By committing this optical blasphemy, the individual drastically alters his own center of gravity. His immobility was the geometric anchor toward which the empire was headed. By becoming excited, the individual shifts his coordinate in space-time. He changes the receiving frequency of his own psyche. The immense mass of the approaching future, guided by the beacon of unmovable certainty, loses the anchoring signal. The empire passes by, missing the target by a few millimeters, and vanishes into the void. The individual is left on empty tracks with his stupid anecdote of that time he almost made it, wondering where luck went. It vanished because the observer lacked the geological density necessary to endure the acoustics of the approach without melting from euphoria. There is a second error, diametrically opposite, but equally lethal. the desperation of the ungrateful ear. When the empire approaches, the mediocre, ambitious man becomes frustrated. He screams in the chamber of his own impatience, complaining that the universe is only delivering crumbs. "This is not what I visualized," he protests. By injecting the corrosive friction of resentment into his own crystal, he alters his refractive index. His anger is an explosive wave of diamagnetic repulsion. By despising the locomotive's whistle for not being the locomotive itself, the slave orders the train to brake and reverse. To survive the acoustics of conquest and ensure the collision is consummated, the monarch must study the astronomy of light and the blue shift. In astrophysics, the Doppler effect manifests in light. When a galaxy or supermassive star moves away from the observer, the light it emits stretches, its wavelength increases, and its spectral signature shifts toward red. It is the dreaded redshift, the signal of separation and cooling. But when a colossal object rushes directly toward the Milky Way, light waves compress. The wavelength shortens, the frequency skyrockets, and the light from that galaxy shifts toward the most energetic, lethal, and penetrating end of the spectrum, the blue shift. Scarcity, lost opportunities, and money slipping through your hands are the redshift of your life. Matter is moving away from your gravity. But when you establish quantum lead in your chest and cosmic tensegrity begins its siege, the luminous topography of your reality changes. You enter the era of blue shift. Synchronicities are flashes of ultraviolet light. They are optical evidence that your abundance is no longer moving away. It is heading for collision. The architect of the now observes this blue shift, and his face reflects not the slightest alteration. There is no hysterical smile of premature triumph. There are no tears of frustration over the slow transit. The Titan breathes deeply, settles the weight of his shoulders, and adopts the chilling immobility of a basalt monolith. He understands that the whistle of synchronicity is a materials resistance test designed by spacetime itself. The cosmos is evaluating if the receptor possesses the structural integrity needed to survive the impact of absolute wealth. If you break at the simple sound of the train, physics will divert the mass to protect you. The universe does not allow an infinite force to collide with cheap glass. Acoustic reception requires you to develop an anechoic chamber inside your skull. When perfect coincidences fall like heavy rain, you must register them with the clinical apathy of an accountant adding figures in a ledger. The billionaire investor responds to your email after years. You do not jump from your chair. You nod, note the variable, and prepare the next geometric move. The government passes a law that triples your patent's value. You do not celebrate in taverns. You drink cold water, thank the math of waves, and keep your gaze fixed. This dictatorial apathy, this absolute refusal to let the world steal a single degree of your internal temperature, is what seals the ballistic trajectory of abundance. By remaining static and lethally bored facing small victories, you generate a black hole of expectation. The universe accelerates the main event's arrival. As the empire approaches the zero coordinate of your present, the frequency of the Doppler effect becomes deafening. This is where the weak man's mind usually fractures from vertigo. Synchronicities stop being isolated weekly events and become a daily bombardment, a superposition of constructive waves that drown sanity. You find the supplier, close the pact, capital is released, and a key competitor withdraws, all within 72 hours. The speed of manifestation becomes turbulent. Barometric pressure in your ecosystem reaches the elastic limit of 3D reality. The air becomes heavy and charged with static electricity before the lightning. It is imperative that during this destructive crescendo of causality, you apply the deepest anchoring your biology can support. You have to sink the roots of your discipline into the bedrock of tactical indifference. Close your mouth hermetically. Speak no word of your imminent triumph to the amorphous mass around you. The rabble is a porous material that will absorb the pressure and ruin the acoustic vacuum you need. Remain in your tower, polishing your prism's lens, and listen as the tone of reality becomes sharper, unbearable, and compressed. The moment of impact is the final collapse of time. The train hits the station. It hits not to destroy it, but to merge with it. The immense mass of the future, the bank account with zeros that defy imagination, the absolute influence in your industry, bursts violently into your present. The shockwave is colossal, sweeping away the last remains of your old life and establishing a new geological order. When the dust settles, when the noise of the crash dissipates and the heavy silence of true power reigns over your new existence, the monarch rises. He checks the integrity of his walls. He confirms, with a glacial nod, that his crystal has not fractured. What humanity tells as luck was but a ballistic culmination. You always knew the locomotive was going to arrive. You had tied it with tungsten cables. You had heard its blue shift for months. You were not guessing. You were simply standing on the platform with the unshakable posture of static certainty, waiting for the collision with the killer punctuality of classical physics. Chapter 9. Perfect Alloy and the Smelting of Slag. The idolatry of purity is one of the most childish and paralyzing optical traps afflicting the human species. The ordinary man, captive in his thermodynamic ignorance and blind to the true mechanics of fluids, traverses 3D architecture, expecting the cosmos to deliver finished tools. He sits in the plane of his own inertia. He gazes at the firmament and demands that luck, chance, or synchronicities descend upon his hands in the form of polished 24-karat gold ingots. The inertial slave yearns for the perfect opportunity. The investor who asks no hard questions, the market lacking competitors, the paved road free of obstacles. When physical reality, which is a relentless industrial furnace and not a crystal nursery, throws a harsh event, a frustrating delay, or an apparently useless coincidence in his face, the slave collapses. He screams into the void, curses the heavens for his bad luck, and declares the universe is conspiring against him. He ignores, with the pathetic arrogance of one who has never stepped into a foundry, that the universe does not manufacture finished jewelry. The universe is an open-pit mine that only extracts and hurls raw, oxidized metals covered in living rock. To reclaim absolute sovereignty, you must assume the clinical brutality of the metallurgist. You must understand that supreme synchronicity rarely presents itself with the crystalline clarity of a cut diamond. Most of the time, when Spacetime needs to deliver the ultimate weapon to conquer your industry, it will send the components separately in the form of events that, to the naked eye, seem to have no value. It is here where crystallography and the physics of alloys separate the monarch from the beggar. Contemplate the geological and military history of metals. Copper, in its pure state, is noble to the eye, but thermodynamically speaking, tragically soft. It cannot hold a sharp edge. If you crash a copper sword against a shield, it bends. It leaves you defenseless in the midst of carnage. On the other hand, tin is a metal with a low melting point, pale and structurally fragile. If struck hard, it shatters into useless dust. An inertial slave in a war receiving soft copper and fragile tin would weep on the ground, complaining about his materials. But the ancient engineer, the architect of war, does not weep. He ignites the boilers. He knows that if he takes soft copper and fragile tin, throws them into the refractory ceramic crucible, and raises the temperature above 1,200 degrees Celsius, a phase transition occurs that alters the architecture of electrons. Upon melting, the copper and tin atoms lose their individual weakness and isolation. They mix in a frenetic thermodynamic embrace. The tin introduces itself into the interstitial spaces of the copper's crystalline lattice, blocking the sliding of atomic layers. When this boiling liquid is poured and cooled, bronze is born. It is a perfect alloy, hard, lethal, and capable of maintaining an edge that will cut through the enemy's raw iron to the bone. Weakness added to weakness, subjected to the dictatorial fire of isolation and thermal compression, engenders absolute geometric superiority. The forge of your empire operates with this same math. Synchronicities are not measured by the kindness of their initial appearance. The universe will hurl soft events at you, a trivial talk with a stranger, reading an irrelevant article, or a cancelled trip that forces you to stay in a boring city. Simultaneously, it will hurl fragile or painful events, a betrayal. The weak man looks at these separately. He suffers over the denied credit, fragile tin, and dismisses the station talk, soft copper, as a waste of time. His mind operates at room temperature. In the cold of inertia, metals do not melt. They simply collide and cause bruises. His reality is a pile of oxidized scrap. But the king in his center, the architect who has sealed his chest with the quantum lead of unnegotiable victory, does not allow his internal temperature to drop. When events crash against his atmosphere, he does not react with hysteria. He opens the floodgates of his own psychological blast furnace. He throws the betrayal, the denied credit, and the trivial talk directly into the boiling crucible of his absolute concentration. He applies tactical blindness. He refuses to see events as isolated tragedies and begins to inject them with the barometric pressure of his purpose. He sits in the dark to watch matter melt. To make the events of chance melt and reveal the perfect alloy they hide, the Titan must master the science of slag separation. In every metallurgical process, the mineral never arrives pure. It comes mixed with silica, sulfur, and parasitic rocks that the Earth has adhered to it for millennia. When the fire reaches its maximum brutality and the metal becomes liquid, these impurities do not integrate into the alloy. Due to their lower atomic density and structural incompatibility, they separate from the boiling metal and float to the surface. This dark, bubbling, toxic crust is called slag or dross. If the blacksmith is negligent and lets the slag cool with the alloy, the resulting metal will be full of stress cracks and will crumble at the first impact of reality. The blacksmith must take a long iron skimmer and, enduring the radiation that burns his eyelashes, carefully scrape the slag away. In the crucible of your consciousness, slag is mammalian emotion. When the universe sends the destructive synchronicity of a denied credit or a partner's betrayal, that event brings the silica of panic, the sulfur of victimhood, and the phosphorus of irrational rage. Your biology's reaction is to feel the pain. The inertial slave takes the event unpurified, letting his rage mix with the data, and when his mind cools, his decisions are brittle and reactive. He destroys his own prestige with useless lawsuits, or sinks into depression, allowing the slag to ruin the steel of his empire. The architect observes the event differently. He feels the heat of rage floating to the surface. With the clinical cruelty of a structural sociopath, he takes the geometric skimmer of his will and scrapes emotion out of the equation. He scrapes humiliation. He scrapes financial terror. He removes all emotional temperature that contaminates the math of the event. He hurls that boiling slag into the darkness of the vacuum, refusing to grant a single joule of importance to how he feels. What remains floating in his intellect are ballistic data, cold, pure, and lethally useful. The partner betrayed him. The pure data is that he now has a logistical vacancy. The credit was denied. The pure data is that the bank has a risk protocol that just left a market sector unattended. The trip was cancelled, and he had a trivial talk. The pure data is that the stranger mentioned a fissure in foreign import regulations. He then forces these three atoms of info to collide. The soft copper of the stranger mixes with the fragile tin of the denied credit and the burning carbon of the traitor. The flash of the perfect alloy illuminates his skull. Synchronicity reveals its destructive majesty. By crossing pure data stripped of emotional slag, the architect discovers a legal crack. This crack allows him to bypass the tariff that made his traitorous partner necessary. By not depending on the bank, he can use a decentralized financing model that just emptied the need for traditional capital. In 1 millisecond, the Titan has forged an asymmetric strategy that annihilates the betrayal. It bypasses the banking system and grants him an absolute import monopoly over territory his competitors don't even know exists. The three misfortunes were not obstacles. They were the copper, tin, and fire needed to melt the bronze blade with which he just decapitated his entire industry. This is the non-negotiable physics of forged causality. The pieces of the universe, when examined from the stillness of the absolute center of gravity, are never disconnected. The loom of gravity always spins with a geometric purpose. But the network only becomes visible to him whose furnace is hot enough. To sustain this level of industrial fusion, you must make an asbestos oath against haste. Mastering a master alloy requires dissolution time and cooling under strict thermal isolation. When the universe deals a blow, Your biological mandate is the immediate prohibition of linear judgment. If you react in the first second declaring the day is ruined, you are pouring ice water on the crucible. The metal will splinter. You must adopt the posture of the monolith, swallow the event, anchor your boots in the rock of indifference, and dictate in silence, "I will proceed to ignition." This suspension of emotional judgment is the heat shield protecting you from the entropy of the masses. The mob will try to force you to react. When you lose the asset, the weak will offer toxic empathy. They will pat your shoulder and offer excuses. That empathy is chemical slag trying to oxidize you, rejected with a coldness that freezes them in place. You have not lost a war. You have received the raw tungsten block nature hurled, and you are evaluating the temperature to liquefy it. If you let their pity in, they will lower the atmospheric pressure of your certainty and ruin the alloy's tension. The mastery of slag fusion also demands a new relationship with friction. Heat is but the agitation of atoms caused by friction. In the architecture of synchronicities, pain and dissonance are not signs to retreat. They are the exact metrics of the rising temperature in your furnace. When your chest tightens because reality has closed all doors and hurled 3 chaotic events at once, you are not in a collapse. You are witnessing atomic friction as materials overcome yield strength to mix. The intellectual pain of connecting the dots is the exothermic heat of forming bronze. Do not close your eyes. Hold the pressure of the optical loop over the raw data until the paper of reality bursts into flames and reveals the code written in invisible ink beneath the ash. The geological moment will come when the alloy has cooled and the 3D matrix must face what you forged. When you apply the new strategy, the silence of the competition will be deafening. They will see the indestructible solidity of your move and realize you used the same bricks they discarded to build the fortress now besieging them. They cannot defeat a man who uses misfortune to temper his steel. The fabric of synchronicities is not woven with the soft feathers of hope or favor. True networks of cosmic tension are woven in the bottom of blast furnaces, fusing the blackest rock of human geology under the geometric dictatorship of a mind that refuses to blink. Stop demanding purity from the cradle. Stop begging for clean ingredients. Assume the crown of the absolute blacksmith. Walk through life collecting the smoking scrap of accidents and crises. Place them in your isolation, ignite the forge of unmovable attention, and subject the metal to the dictatorship of quantum lead. When you pour the perfect alloy, reality itself will hiss at the contact with your work's heat. You do not wait for luck to deliver opportunity. You take the misery of chance, melt it with the fire of inevitability, and force the cosmos to drink from your crucible. The forge is yours. Chapter 10. Quantum Entanglement and the Welding of Spacetime. The idolatry of geography and the terror of physical distance constitute the oldest and most suffocating geometric prison that the human species has built for itself. From the instant primitive man measured the world by the wear of his feet upon stone, civilization has been subjected to the tyranny of space. The inertial slave conceives the universe as an immense empty plain where objects of value, capital, and elite allies are separated by kilometric chasms. In this rudimentary and thermodynamically primitive vision, the only way to influence a distant object is physical displacement. The slave assumes he must invest kinetic energy. He believes he must burn fuel, cross oceans, and submit to the friction of the atmosphere to touch opportunity with his own hands. He lives subjected to classical mechanics and the physics of impact, convinced that distance is an invulnerable shield and that transit time is a non-negotiable toll paid with his own exhaustion. This devotion to distance is an unforgivable optical blindness. Geography is a consensual hallucination, a mirage created by the slowness of cold bodies. For the architect of the now to reclaim the crown of absolutism and subject synchronicities to his dictatorship, he must eradicate the belief in spatial separation. He must enter the most disturbing, dark, and mathematically pure confines of modern physics. He must abandon the world of elastic collisions and enter the silent majesty of spooky action at a distance. In the most hermetic laboratories of quantum optics, science has proven a phenomenon that shattered the ego of physics. We speak of quantum entanglement. When two subatomic particles are forged in the same thermal or light event, their properties remain entangled in a single geometric state. If you take one particle and confine it on Earth, and send the second to the other end of the Andromeda Galaxy, classical logic fails. Classical logic would dictate they have become separate entities. However, the rawness of the cosmos proves otherwise. If a physicist alters the spin of the particle on Earth, forcing it to point up, the particle in Andromeda, in that exact millisecond, without the slightest delay, alters its spin to point down. There is no radio wave traveling between them. There is no beam of light crossing the abyss to carry the order, because light would take millions of years to arrive. The communication occurs in zero time, with zero friction and zero resistance. The space separating them is thermodynamically irrelevant. In the deepest fabric of reality, the two particles never separated. They remain a single entity, unified by an equation that completely ignores the illusion of geography. The translation of this quantum aberration to the macroscopic scale of your own empire is the culmination of geometric sovereignty. Supreme synchronicities, those that alter the course of an entire industry or align the will of power figures thousands of miles away, do not operate by linear causality. They do not happen because you sent a message or because you walked toward them. They occur through the entanglement of your own consciousness. They occur through entanglement with the dense matter of the outside world. To execute this anomaly at a human scale, the architect must transmute his mind into a singularity of absolute cold. In quantum physics, entanglement states are extremely fragile in the face of thermal noise. If the environment is too hot, if there is atomic agitation, the particles suffer decoherence and the bond breaks. The ordinary man lives in a perpetual state of thermal noise. His mind boils with anxiety, desire, and the terror of rejection. This constant emotional boiling prevents his will from entangling. He is a closed, noisy system, thermodynamically isolated by his own entropic heat. The king in his center, conversely, descends to the isolation chamber of his own being and reduces the temperature of his passions to the psychological equivalent of absolute zero. He applies tactical blindness upon the environment. He disconnects his senses from news of catastrophe and the fluctuations of the economy. Upon reaching this glacial stillness, the thermal noise of doubt disappears. His will stabilizes. In this state of perfect atomic coherence, the architect fixes his attention on the objective, the elite alliance, the victory. By holding the vision of his triumph with the heaviness of quantum lead, without allowing the slightest vibration of uncertainty, his will becomes the first particle of the equation. The external universe, which is an obedient fluid lacking in tension, responds to this state of extreme coherence. The capital, the infrastructure, or the ally the architect requires, no matter on which continent or under which time zone they reside, becomes the second particle. As the Titan operates from the very root of the fabric of reality, where distance is a mirage, resonance occurs in the vacuum. Both entities become entangled. Understanding the physical manifestation of this entanglement requires abandoning the hunter's optics and adopting the discipline of the master welder. In heavy metallurgy, to join two industrial steel plates irreversibly, one does not use glue or ropes. One uses electric arc welding. The operator applies an electric current of such terrifying intensity that the air itself ionizes, generating a plasma arc that reaches thousands of degrees Celsius. Under this localized thermal violence, the crystalline structure of both steel plates melts. A fusion bath is formed. The atoms of one plate mix and flow toward the atoms of the other. When the operator withdraws the arc and the metal cools, the two pieces are no longer simply joined. They have become a single, continuous structure, an indivisible atomic lattice. Where there was separation, there is now a seam of pure titanium. In the architecture of synchronicities, your unmovable certainty is the tungsten electrode, and your concentration is the plasma arc. When you decide, in the cold silence of your isolation, that a portion of the market or a volume of capital belongs to you by decree of gravity, you do not send a pleading email. You do not go out to compete with the commoners. You sit in your smelting chamber, stabilize your breathing, anchor the posture of your spine, and apply the electric current of your attention upon that single distant goal. The intensity of your conviction, devoid of all doubt, acts as the voltaic arc. It melts the fabric of space-time, separating you from your goal. You melt the illusion of geography. In the quantum plane, the separation between your identity and the goal disappears. A probabilistic fusion bath is created. By settling your weight in the certainty that the event belongs to you, you withdraw the arc. The 3D reality suddenly cools. The weld is sealed. From that exact millisecond, the opportunity in Tokyo, the investor in London, or the competitor in your hometown have been indissolubly welded to the topography of your own empire. What follows is the spectacle the rabble mistakes for magic or luck. Since in the quantum plane, the weld has been executed and distance has been annihilated, the 3D physical universe is forced to update its hologram to reflect the new structural truth. The inertia of the material world has to catch up with the speed of entanglement. This is when synchronicity collapses at your door. The phone rings. The individual who possesses the steel keys of the infrastructure you needed calls you, seeking exactly what you offer. Government regulations of a foreign country change overnight, opening a legal highway aligned with the patent you registered in silence months ago. The ordinary man, spectator of your rise, will try to find the causal chain. He will track your steps and try to find out whom you bribed. He will break his head trying to apply the physics of elastic collisions to a phenomenon that operated through action at a distance. He will never find the line, because there is no line. The connection did not travel through air or earth. The connection was made at the atomic root of space, in the vacuum itself, and simply emerged to reality as a metal flower already welded. Mastery of this distance welding demands the eradication of the biological weakness that destroys most men, the urge to verify. When a master welder finishes his fusion bead, he does not start hitting the glowing metal with a hammer to see if it stuck well. He knows that if he interferes while the alloy is cooling, he will introduce micro-fractures of tension, ruining the lattice and causing a lethal burst when under pressure. He steps aside, trusting blindly in the physics of the arc he just applied, and allows thermodynamics to follow its natural course. The inertial slave trying to apply his will lacks this psychological asbestos. He performs his visualization, and 5 minutes later, anxiety devours him. He frantically checks market news and becomes desperate because the person hasn't called. In the precise instant he formulates a plan B, in the millisecond doubt filters into his blood, the system temperature spikes. Thermal noise destroys quantum coherence. Entanglement is irreversibly broken. The invisible weld, about to solidify in space-time, shatters into a million pieces of useless glass. The distant event disconnects and recedes into the mist of chance. The individual sighs, "I knew these synchronicities weren't real." It was real, but he destroyed it because he could not sustain the cooling of doubt. Space-time welding admits no cowards or anxious supervisors. Quantum sovereignty demands that, once you fix the coordinate of your conquest, you assume an indifference toward immediate 3D evidence. You must develop the coldness of dark stars. Your physical behavior must be that of a man who has the key. You walk with the geometric slowness of consummated authority. You do not pursue the result, because pursuing what is already welded to you is a redundancy the universe penalizes with failure. This is the paradox. The 3D universe only delivers monopoly when you become genuinely indifferent to needing it. Indifference is not apathy. It is the total absence of the friction of scarcity. It is the state of rest of heavy matter. The sun is not anxious to know if the Earth will orbit it tomorrow. The sun simply holds its mass, and gravity makes the orbit a mathematical fatality. The architect feels no anxiety about synchronicity. His own internal density makes the event an inescapable geological dictate. As you install yourself in this frequency, the fabric of the world will begin to fold around you. Distance will stop being an obstacle and become an illusory variable. Your empire expands because you become a gravitational sink. Geography shortens, oceans dry up, and mountains of bureaucracy collapse, attracted by the spiral of your quantum well. You will watch your competitors age in airports, burning their kinetic energy, trying to weave networks with fragile cotton threads. They sweat blood trying to be everywhere at once. Meanwhile, you will rule your territory from the absolute stillness of your isolation chamber. You will hold the electrode of your attention in the dark, pulse the plasma arc of your conviction, and weld continents and capitals to your benefit without raising your voice or moving a single boot. Supreme mastery is reached when you understand there is no out there to be conquered. The outside world is simply the glass screen where the resonances and entanglements you forge in the solitary forge of your density are projected. The cosmos is narrow, intimate, and docile when subjected to the right temperature. Fix the lens. Raise the mass of your quantum lead. Ignore the pathetic illusion of space and time. Convert your certainty into the electric arc that ionizes the vacuum. Join the tectonic plates of your present and future in a single bead of molten metal. And then step back, cool the system, and allow reality to fall. Allow the heavy reality of the universe to fall on its knees at your feet, bringing the physical manifestation of the decree you just printed upon the structural code of creation. Distance is dead. The empire is welded. Conclusion: the absolute center of gravity. The closing of this structural vault marks the definitive funeral of chance. For millennia, humanity has walked the surface of history with the fragile posture of a beggar, looking at the starry sky with the pathetic hope that a fortuitous alignment of stars would throw them the crumbs of fortune. We have dismantled that hallucination. Through the acoustics of constructive interference, the seismology of chaos, spontaneous crystallization, and geometric refraction, the fabric of synchronicities has been exposed. It is not a poetic miracle, but the most relentless and obedient thermodynamic machinery of the cosmos. Chance has died, the physics of mass reigns. Upon reaching this vertex of your own geological evolution, the mandate is irrevocable. You must assume the tyranny of your own weight. The inertial slave will continue wandering the 3D world like an erratic comet, spending his kinetic energy begging the wind to change direction, terrified by distance and paralyzed by friction. You, the architect of the now, have been instructed in the forging of quantum lead. You know that true conquest requires no linear movement or sweatshed on the plane. It requires the absolute condensation of your will into a single point of spacetime. You are the furnace, the crucible, and the anvil. When you raise the density of your certainty to the level of a stellar singularity, the external universe has no mathematical choice but to collapse toward your center. The synchronicities that will weave your empire, the allies forged in tungsten, the capital flowing like liquid metal, are not prizes for your morality. They are the inescapable geometric consequence of the curvature that your immense gravity imposes upon three-dimensional reality. By eradicating the slag of fear, by welding your present with your future through the voltaic arc of your unmovable attention, you become the absolute center of gravity. Let weak men continue betting their destiny on the roulette of probability. Let them cry when the earthquake destroys their flimsy masonry pyramids. You do not play with probability, you dictate the thermodynamics of the ecosystem. Plant your boots in the bedrock of the now, stifle any vibration of doubt, and ignite the reactor. Ignite the reactor of your sovereign indifference. The entire cosmos is an inert loom waiting for the command of a superior mass. Cease chasing the horizon. Become the gravitational abyss that forces the horizon to surrender and to crash violently against your chest. The empire was always waiting for your density.